first thing I saw that morning was my mother standing barefoot in the middle of our gravel driveway, staring at 5 black SUVs blocking the road to our ranch. She was 72 years old. She was alone. And the HOA guards had just told her she was no longer allowed to leave. I was 43 miles away when she called me. "Ethan," she whispered, and I could hear the tremble in her voice. "There are men here." "What men?" "They say they're with the HOA." I sat up behind the wheel. My mother had lived on our family ranch for 31 years. She knew every fence post, every cattle gate, every bend in the gravel road. She wasn't the kind of woman who panicked easily. "What are they doing?" There was a pause. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. "They're telling me I have to get into their vehicle." I pulled the truck onto the shoulder. "Mom, lock the house. Do not go anywhere. I'm coming. They already blocked the driveway." "Stay inside." "Ethan." "What?" "I think they've been waiting for you to leave." The call went silent. I stared at my phone. Then I turned the truck around. Our ranch sat outside a small Texas town where everybody knew everybody, and where the word HOA had become a joke in our family. Our property had existed long before the subdivision, long before the polished entrance monument, long before the decorative street lamps and identical mailboxes. My grandfather bought the land in 1968. My father expanded the cattle operation. And when my father died, the ranch passed to me and my mother. The HOA had been built around us, not throughout us. For years they had tried to convince us that joining their association would make the neighborhood more unified. We refused. That refusal became a problem. At first, it was little things. Letters about the color of our barn. Complaints about the old red pickup parked beside the workshop. Warnings about cattle being visually inconsistent with the community aesthetic. Then came the fines. Then the lawyers. Then the surveyors. And finally, 3 months earlier, the HOA president Caroline Whitmore showed up at our front gate with a folder under her arm and a smile that never reached her eyes. "You should consider selling," she had told me. I laughed. "Selling what?" "The ranch." I remember looking past her at the pasture. "You're standing on my land." Her smile disappeared. "That attitude is going to make this difficult." I had shrugged. "Then make it difficult." Apparently she had. Because when I reached the ranch that morning, I found 2 county police cruisers parked near the entrance. A white county utility truck sat beside them. And beyond the wooden fence, 3 men in dark uniforms were talking to my mother. I slammed my brakes. Gravel sprayed across the windshield. I jumped out before the truck had fully stopped. "Get away from my mother!" Everyone turned. My mother stood beside the porch, clutching the railing. One of the uniformed men stepped toward me. "Sir, calm down. Who are you?" "Private security contracted by the AOA, then get off my property." He glanced at the 2 police officers. One officer raised a hand. "Mr. Mercer, let's keep this civil." I recognized him. Deputy Alan Brooks. I'd known him for years. "Helene, why are you here?" He looked uncomfortable. "Call came in regarding a property access dispute." "Property access?" I pointed toward my mother. "They tried to put her in a van." The deputy's expression changed. "Did anyone touch her?" "No," my mother answered. Her voice was steadier now. "They told me I had to come with them because the HOA had issued an emergency order." I looked at the security guard. "Show me the order." He opened a folder. A single sheet of paper. No judge's signature. No court seal. Just a letter from the HOA attorney claiming that our property was subject to a temporary access enforcement provision. I almost laughed. "Where's the court order?" The guard said nothing. "Where's the sheriff's order?" Nothing. "Where's the warrant?" Still nothing. Then Caroline Whitmore stepped out from behind one of the SUVs. She wore a cream-colored blazer, sunglasses, and the same expression she'd worn when she first asked me to sell the ranch. "Ethan," she said calmly, "you're making this much more dramatic than it needs to be." I walked toward her. "You sent armed-looking security guards to my mother's house." "They're not armed. That's not the point." "The point," she replied, "is that your mother has refused to cooperate with a lawful property inspection. My mother doesn't need your permission to walk out of her own house." Caroline tilted her head. "Actually, under the association's emergency access provisions, we don't belong to your association." She smiled. "That isn't what the county records show." Those words stopped me. "What did you just say?" She removed a second document from her folder. "Our attorneys discovered a recorded access covenant connected to this parcel." I stared at the paper. I knew every major document attached to our ranch. Or at least I thought I did. Caroline stepped closer. "You've been telling everyone this land is independent of the community." "It is." "Then perhaps you should explain why your grandfather signed an access agreement in 1974. My stomach tightened. My grandfather had died when I was 17. I'd spent years going through his records. But there were boxes I'd never opened. Boxes stored in the old office above the barn. Boxes my father had always told me were just old paperwork. Caroline saw the hesitation on my face. Her smile returned. "That's what I thought." She turned toward the guards. "Proceed." One of them walked toward my mother. I stepped between them. "Nobody is taking my mother anywhere." The deputy moved closer. "Then don't make this worse." I looked at him. "Then tell them to leave?" He hesitated. And that hesitation told me something was wrong, because Deputy Brooks wasn't afraid of me. He was afraid of what was happening around us. Then my mother suddenly spoke. "Ethan." I turned. She was staring toward the barn. "Your grandfather's old office." "What about it?" I remembered something. "What?" She lowered her voice. The night your father died, he told me never to let Caroline Whitmore see what was in that room. I froze. My father had died 6 years earlier, and he'd never once mentioned Caroline. Not to me, not to Mom, not to anyone. I looked at the HOA president. For the first time that morning, she wasn't smiling. That was when I knew this wasn't about an inspection. It wasn't about the HOA. It wasn't even about the ranch. They were looking for something. And whatever it was, my father had spent 6 years making sure they couldn't find it. I grabbed my mother gently by the arm. Mom, go inside. Caroline stepped forward. Ethan, I strongly recommend you don't interfere. I looked at her. You came onto my property with private security and tried to remove my mother. We attempted to enforce a recorded covenant. You failed. Her expression hardened. You don't understand what you're dealing with. I smiled. No. I pointed toward the road. You don't understand who you're dealing with. I walked back toward my truck. Caroline called after me. Where are you going? I stopped. Then I looked over my shoulder to find out what my father was protecting. I drove straight to the barn. The old wooden stairs groaned beneath my boots as I climbed into the office. Dust covered everything. There was a metal filing cabinet in the corner, an old desk, a broken fan, and 6 cardboard boxes stacked beneath the window. I pulled the first one out, tax records. The second contained cattle invoices. The third held photographs. The fourth contained my grandfather's handwritten journals. I opened the fifth. Nothing. Then I noticed the 6th box. It was sealed, not with tape, with an old brass padlock. My father's handwriting was written across the lid. 3 words, D.O. no P.N. I stared at it for several seconds. Then I heard tires outside. I looked through the dusty window. Caroline's SUV was still there. The security guards were still watching the house. But something else had changed. A county vehicle had pulled away. Then another. Deputy Brooks remained. And my mother was standing on the porch. She raised her hand toward me. She was pointing at the road. I looked. A black SUV had just turned onto the gravel lane. Then another. Then another. Within less than a minute, 5 identical black SUVs were approaching our ranch. They moved slowly, perfectly spaced, no sirens, no lights, just 5 dark vehicles rolling toward the HOA guards. Caroline stepped off the porch. Her face went completely pale. One of the guards reached for his radio. Deputy Brooks stared down the road, and I realized something that made no sense. Nobody at the ranch had called them. Not me, not my mother, not the deputy. Yet whoever was inside those 5 SUVs knew exactly where we were, and they were coming straight for us. The 5 SUVs stopped at the mouth of our driveway. For several seconds, nobody moved. The engines remained running. The windows were tinted so dark that I couldn't see who was inside. Caroline Whitmore stood beside her SUV, staring at them. One of the HOA guards whispered something into his radio. Then the doors opened. 2 men stepped out of the first vehicle. They weren't wearing police uniforms. They wore dark suits, plain white shirts, and small identification badges clipped near their belts. Another 2 stepped from the second SUV. Then another pair from the third. The final 2 vehicles remained occupied. The first man walked toward Deputy Brooks. "Are you Deputy Brooks?" "Yes." The man handed him a document. Brooks read it. His face changed. "Where did you get this?" "County records." Brooks looked toward me, then toward Caroline. "This is a civil preservation ordered." Caroline immediately stepped forward. "That document doesn't apply here." The man looked at her. "Are you Caroline Whitmore?" "Yes." "You've been notified to cease all activity involving the Mercer property." Her mouth fell open. "You don't have authority over me." The man calmly pointed toward the paper in Deputy Brooks's hand. "Neither do I, the court does." Caroline snatched the document from Brooks. She read it, then read it again. "What is this?" I walked down the porch steps. "That's what I'd like to know." The man turned toward me. "Mystery." "Mercer?" "Yes." "I need you to come with me." My instincts immediately kicked in. Why, he reached into his jacket and handed me a card. "I'm Daniel Reeves, Federal Marshal Service." I stared at the card, then at the 5 SUVs, then at my mother. She looked just as confused as I was. "Why would federal marshals be here?" Reeves lowered his voice. "Because your property is now connected to a federal investigation." Everything went quiet. Caroline's face went white. "You're making a mistake," she said. Reeves didn't even look at her. "Ma'am, step away from the property line. This is an OA matter." "No," he replied. "It isn't." One of the guards stepped forward. "Sir, we have authorization from the association." Reeves finally turned toward him. "Then you should call your attorney." The guard looked at Caroline. She immediately pulled out her phone. I watched her walk away. Something about the way she moved told me she was scared. Not angry. Scared. That was when I knew the old box in the barn mattered. I turned toward my mother. "Mom, stay with Deputy Brooks." She nodded. I ran back upstairs. The brass padlock was still hanging from the box. I searched my father's old desk. Nothing. Then I remembered something. My father always kept spare keys inside the red toolbox. I opened it. Under a handful of rusty bolts was a tiny brass key. I held it up. My hands were shaking. I inserted it into the padlock click. The box opened. Inside were dozens of documents wrapped in plastic. Property maps, survey reports, old county letters, bank records, photographs, and one thick envelope marked "Marcr led original survey." I opened it. The first page showed the ranch boundaries. The second showed something I had never seen. A hand-drawn map from 1974. There was a thin red line running through the center of our property. At first I thought it was a boundary. Then I noticed the label. Prevenez y CC ses cardar. My heart started pounding. Beneath it was another notation. reserved for emergency governmental use. I kept reading. The corridor had been created before the subdivision existed. It crossed the exact road the HOA guards had blocked, and according to the document, the HOA had absolutely no authority over it. But there was more. Attached to the survey was a letter signed by my grandfather. It said that the access corridor was never to be transferred, sold, restricted, or controlled by a private association. I sat down. That explained why the HOA had been obsessed with our driveway. They weren't trying to control my ranch. They were trying to control the only legal access corridor connecting the county road to several properties beyond us. And apparently, someone had discovered that controlling the corridor was worth far more than my cattle land. I kept searching. Then I found a second envelope. This one had my father's name on it. Inside was a photograph. My father stood beside a younger Caroline Whitmore. I didn't recognize the third man in the picture, but I recognized the building behind them. It was the old county planning office. On the back of the photograph, my father had written, "They know about the corridor." Underneath that, if they ever come after Mom, they found the missing file. I stopped breathing for a moment. My mother had predicted this. 6 years earlier, I grabbed the remaining documents and ran downstairs. Outside, something had changed. The HO guards were gone. Their vehicles had been moved away from the driveway. Caroline was standing beside Deputy Brooks, arguing with someone on the phone. Reeves saw me. "Did you find something?" I held up the envelope. "My father left this." Reeves's expression became serious. "Where?" "In the barn." He looked at the other marshals. "Secure the documents." I handed him the envelope. He opened it carefully. When he saw the survey, he immediately called someone. "Yes," he said, "have the original." Caroline heard him. Her head snapped toward us. "What original?" Nobody answered. She walked closer. "You can't take those documents." I looked directly at her. "You tried to take my mother." She stopped. "That was a misunderstanding." "Knew." I shook my head. "You knew exactly what you were doing." She lowered her voice. "You have no idea how complicated this is." I stepped closer. "Then explain it." She said nothing. Deputy Brooks looked at her. "Caroline, where did the HOA get the authority to restrict this corridor?" She stared at him. "I'd have to speak to council." "That's not an answer." She turned away. That was when a county pickup pulled into the driveway. A man in a gray button-down shirt stepped out. He introduced himself as Martin Hale, Deputy County Clerk. He looked at the survey in Reeves's hands. Then he looked at me. "Where did you find that?" "My father's office." Hale exhaled slowly. "I've been looking for that document for 11 years. The entire yard went silent. "Why?" Hale looked toward Caroline. "Because the county's original copy disappeared from the records archive." Caroline immediately protested. "That doesn't prove anything." Hale ignored her. "The original access corridor was created in 1974. The county maintained it for decades, until the OA took over." I said. He nodded. "That's the problem." He pulled a folder from his truck. "We found irregularities in the subdivision's 2009 development records." Reeves looked at him. "What kind of irregularities?" "Boundary changes, easement modifications, several signatures that don't match archived county records." My stomach tightened. "Forgery." Hale hesitated. "We don't know yet." Caroline suddenly stepped toward him. "You're making accusations without evidence." Hale looked her straight in the eyes. "We're looking at evidence right now." Then he said something that made her freeze. 3 months ago, someone accessed the county archive using an old HOA authorization code. Caroline's face changed. Reeves noticed. "So did I. Who had that code?" I asked. Hale looked at me. "According to our logs?" He paused. "Caroline Whitmore." She immediately shook her head. "That code was used by dozens of people. Not recently," Hale said. Nobody spoke. Then my mother's voice came from behind me. "Ethan." I turned. She was holding another piece of paper. "I found this in your father's desk." I took it. It was a handwritten note. My father's handwriting. Only 6 words. "Don't trust the OA lawyer." I looked toward Caroline. She was already looking at me. Then I saw a black sedan parked far down the road. It had been there since the marshals arrived. No one seemed to notice it, except one of the marshals. Reeves followed my eyes. His expression hardened. "Everyone stay where you are." He reached for his radio. The black sedan slowly began moving toward us. And for the first time that morning, I realized the HOA might not be the biggest threat on my property. Someone else had been watching. Someone who knew about my father's secret. And someone who apparently knew exactly when we would discover it. The black sedan rolled toward us at walking speed. Nobody spoke. The 5 SUVs remained positioned across the driveway, and the marshals spread out without making a scene. My mother stood beside me. Deputy Brooks rested one hand near his radio. The sedan stopped 20 yards away. A man stepped out. He was in his late 50s, wearing a charcoal suit and carrying a leather briefcase. Caroline Whitmore stared at him. Then she whispered something I couldn't hear. The man closed the car door. "Mr. Mercer." I nodded. "My name is Richard Voss. I'm counsel for the development company that originally purchased the land surrounding your ranch." I looked at Caroline. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "Why are you here?" Voss glanced at the marshals. "I believe we have a misunderstanding." Reeves stepped forward. "You've been advised to leave." Voss smiled. "I have legal representation, and you can exercise that right from somewhere else." Voss's smile disappeared. He turned toward me. "Your father understood the value of that corridor. My father understood property rights. Your father understood money." I stepped toward him. "Careful." He opened his briefcase. Inside were copies of contracts, maps, and financial documents. The development was designed around that access corridor, he said. Without it, several phases of the community can't legally connect to the county road. So your family has been sitting on the key to a multi-million-dollar development. I looked at Caroline. That's why you wanted the ranch. She finally answered. Not the whole ranch. Her voice was quiet. Just the corridor. Everything suddenly made sense. The pressure, the fines, the inspection, the attempt to remove my mother, the missing county records. They hadn't wanted our land because it was beautiful. They wanted a piece of paper buried inside it. A piece of paper worth millions. Voss looked at me. Your father was offered $12 million. I felt my jaw tighten. Never told me. He refused. Good. Voss smiled bitterly. He made a mistake. My mother stepped forward. Everyone looked at her. She stared directly at Voss. My husband made the right choice. Voss looked surprised. My mother continued. He told me that if they ever came back I was supposed to remember one thing. What? She smiled. He said they would eventually get greedy. Voss's expression changed. My mother looked at me. And he was right. For a moment nobody moved, then Reeves's radio crackled. He listened. Understood. He turned toward me. Mr. Mercer, I need to speak with you privately. We walked several feet away. The federal investigation has been active for months, he said. What exactly are they investigating? Financial fraud, document alteration, obstruction, and possible conspiracy involving the development company. I looked back toward Caroline. Is she involved? We're still establishing that. And the HOA! Same answer! I took a breath. Then why did they come after my mother? Reeves looked at me. Because someone believed she knew where the original documents were. I remembered my father's note. My mother had never been the target by accident. They believed she was the last person who knew what my father had hidden. Reeves continued. Your father apparently kept copies of documents the county lost. Why? Because he didn't trust the people handling the development. That sounded exactly like my father. He had spent his entire life believing that if something mattered, you kept your own records. I looked at the ranch, the red barn, the cattle pasture, the old wooden fence. Everything suddenly felt different. This wasn't just my inheritance. My father had been protecting it. The next 2 weeks became a blur. County investigators arrived. Surveyors measured the access corridor. The original maps were compared with decades of county records. The HOA's legal filings were examined. Bank transfers were subpoenaed. And eventually the biggest piece fell into place. The 2009 HO development map had been altered. The access corridor had been redrawn. The original county restriction had been removed from the digital copy. Someone had then used that altered map to convince several homeowners that the HOA controlled the road. But the original survey in my father's barn proved otherwise. The case moved quickly after that. Caroline resigned as HO president. The HOA attorney was placed under investigation. Richard Voss's development company faced multiple federal charges. Several board members hired their own attorneys. And the county officially restored the corridor to its original legal status. But there was one final surprise. 3 months after the investigation began, I received a letter from the county. Inside was an offer, not from the development company, from the county itself. They wanted to purchase a permanent conservation easement around the ranch. The offer was substantial. My mother read the letter at the kitchen table. What do you think? I looked through the window. The evening sun was turning the pasture gold. What would Grandpa have done? She smiled. He'd ask whether the money came with strings attached. I laughed. He'd probably say no. We turned it down. Instead, we agreed to a limited public access agreement protecting the historic corridor while keeping the ranch privately owned. The county built a small official sign at the road. It didn't mention the HOA. It didn't mention Caroline. It didn't mention the investigation. It simply read Merciara Sissis Corridor, East Tebus in 1974. A few months later, I stood in front of the county courthouse while a judge issued the final ruling. The court invalidated the HOA's claims over our property. The altered documents were officially removed from the record. The county recognized our original boundaries. And the people who had spent years telling us that they were more powerful than a family finally had to answer for what they'd done. After the hearing, Caroline approached me. She looked completely different. No designer blazer, no confident smile. Just a tired woman holding a folder against her chest. I should have listened, she said. I didn't answer. She looked toward my mother. I shouldn't have frightened her. My mother studied her for several seconds. Then she said something I never expected. You don't owe me an apology. Caroline looked confused. My mother continued. You owe yourself an explanation. Caroline lowered her eyes. Then she walked away. I watched her disappear into the courthouse crowd. My mother slipped her arm through mine. You know what your father would say? What? He'd say you finally learned how to read the fine print. I laughed. That's it. She smiled. No. She looked toward the courthouse. He'd also say that land isn't valuable because of what someone offers you for it. Then what makes it valuable? She looked at me. Who you refused to sell it to. 6 months later, life finally became quiet again. The cattle were back in the southern pasture. The red barn needed a new roof. The wooden fence still leaned near the creek. And my mother once again sat on the porch every evening with a glass of iced tea. Sometimes I'd look toward the driveway and remember those 5 black SUVs. I used to think they were the most important part of the story. They weren't. The real turning point had happened decades earlier, when my grandfather drew one line on a map and refused to erase it. My father protected that line. My mother remembered it, and I finally understood why. The HOA thought my mother was alone that morning. They thought an old woman standing on a quiet ranch would be easy to intimidate. They never realized she was standing on 30 years of family history, decades of records, and a promise my father had made before he died. And when 5 black SUVs rolled onto our road, they weren't bringing power to my family. They were bringing witnesses. Because sometimes the people who look the most vulnerable are standing on the strongest ground. And that was the day I learned something I'll never forget. They thought my mother was alone. They forgot she was standing on our family's land.